Chapter 15. We waited for Charming in front of Treasure Island.
I could be picking up couples right now and making money.
Lenny complained, watching the newest batch of fresh pickings stroll along the sidewalk. Frankie shut down the chapel tonight, remember? We're here to support him, I said.
And I need to support my habits.
I don't want to know about your habits.
I wasn't going to tell you anyway.
Hey, look at all the women eyeing Frankie.
Danny said.
They're barely giving Caleb a second glance.
They gave him a first glance, I said.
But normally they turn to give him a second look. They aren't doing it. Frankie's getting the most attention.
It's the suit, I said. It fits him perfectly.
It's the hair and dark looks.
Danny said.
He looks like the perfect bad boy.
Bad boys can be perfect? I questioned. She nodded vigorously and began explaining her theories on the perfect bad boy. I shook my head, stopping her. Sounds confusing, and we're still talking about Frankie.
I know, but these women don't. They're trying to capture this perfect bad boy's eye.
Thankfully, Charming showed up, distracting Danny long enough to forget the conversation. He was dressed in a similar fashion to Frankie, though Frankie's suit had the advantage of being exquisitely cut. Behind Charming were two of his associates. The man and woman looked familiar, but without their costumes, I wasn't quite sure if I had seen them before. Charming scowled at the transformed Frankie. He quickly composed himself.
I see we're all here. How should we proceed?
Frankie gave him a casual, unaffected smile.
This is your game. Why don't you tell us?
I think the fairest way is to let us choose your male and female. Your team can choose mine.
What's the objective?
To obtain a phone number.
What if we tie?
Then we keep playing rounds until someone finally wins.
And the stakes remain the same?
Charming gave a nod. Frankie flicked a glance through the crowd, landing back on Charming.
Agreed, let's get on with it.
I watched the two men in wonder. It was almost as if they'd swapped personalities. If Frankie could retain his new character throughout the competition, we could win.
Women first.
Charming stated with a flick of his hand, sending his team into the crowd.
Caleb, can you please find a woman for Charming?
Frankie requested. Caleb scanned the crowd and narrowed on a target. Why Caleb? I asked. Frankie turned with a sleek smile.
Because he can lure any woman. The woman might not be happy when she's been lured to Charming after receiving Caleb's attention.
He gave a carefree shrug.
Either way, it's better than what Lenny or you could turn up.
That actually made some sense. I studied the two competitors. They both could easily sway a female. But a man? I sighed. Only Frankie could end up in such a ridiculous competition. It wasn't long before a woman found herself in front of Frankie. A nun? I blinked. Lenny blew out his breath in a low whistle, Danny gaped, and Charming grinned. Frankie glanced down at her with a dazzling smile. He altered his voice as he said,
Such a beautiful woman with such a beautiful faith. I'm spellbound by such a rare jewel.
Shit, we're going to hell.
Danny said. I seconded that thought. Surely Frankie wouldn't push past the line of impropriety with a nun. I debated if I should start praying, or would that be considered a slap in the Almighty's face? Frankie stepped closer, brushing the nun's cheek with the back of his fingertips. Danny and I grasped each other for support and watched helplessly as he leaned in and whispered something that made her blush. Frankie straightened as she dug through her purse to find paper and a pen. Frankie took the offered number with a smile and wink. She hurried away but gave him one last blushing glance. Frankie, did you just send us to hell? I demanded.
No, she's an actress wearing a theater costume. I recognized it right away.
He said low enough so Charming couldn't hear. It didn't matter. Charming was occupied with his own challenge. He wasn't focused on us, but rather on a cigarette-puffing elderly woman with a walker. Charming was having a hard time feeding the woman lines. She kept asking him to repeat himself.
I said your eyes are the color of a tranquil sea foam.
He shouted. The woman cocked her head as if he might be a little daft.
That's glaucoma, not foam.
We're going to hell for sure.
Danny said, shaking her head. I glared at Caleb, who smirked back. He whispered,
She's about the only person who can't be seduced by charming.
No, she's not. If I can see through him, there must be others. Caleb brightened.
Interesting.
What?
You're on deck for the next round.
No way! I'm not going through that torture again. Anyway, isn't it against the rules?
You heard the same rules I did. I can pick whoever I want. I pick you.
I glowered at him. The only good part about that plan was that we'd stop dragging innocent people into the competition. And if Charming fails with the elderly woman, we'll be ahead. Hope Dolphin leaped through my insides until I saw the woman give Charming a piece of paper with her number on it. Danny's hand strangled my arm as we watched in suspended horror. Once she shuffled away, both teams glowered at each other. They immediately went to find their next challenge, men.
I don't know if I can watch.
Lenny said.
If the women are any indication of what the men will be like, I don't think my delicate insides can take it.
I arched my brow but refrained from retorting. I scanned for Caleb. He was aimlessly wandering through the crowd until he bumped into a man with his wife or girlfriend. He spoke briefly and led them over to Charming. Charming's eyes flickered between the couple, and he nearly lost his composure. He straightened his suit and flicked imaginary dust from his coat as he prepared himself for a very awkward seduction. We openly gawked, waiting for him to make his first move.
I can't watch. It's like offering up a sacrificial lamb.
Danny said, squeezing her eyes shut. Charming's team brought over Frankie's challenge, a towering man complete with a thick beard and a scowling, heavy brow. Frankie glanced up at the man with hardly a wince. Of course, Frankie doesn't discriminate when it comes to men. This hardy lumberjack might be right up his alley.
These guys said you want to talk to me.
The man said, jabbing his thumb over his shoulder to point at Charming's giggling team. Frankie nodded politely before asking,
Do you want me now? Or later?
I sputtered. Caleb barked with laughter, and Danny and Lenny backed away. The man's scowl deepened until his thick brow covered his face.
Perhaps I've made a mistake.
Frankie said with the same light tone.
I could have sworn I've seen you before.
I'm not from around here.
I stepped back with Danny and Lenny. I think I'm having heart palpitations, I said. Someone has to lose and fast. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Frankie flashed a smile.
I know where I've seen you. Are you sure you don't want to have a drink later?
No.
The man gritted and tried to sidestep Frankie. Frankie blocked him with one easy step and touched his arm. The man jerked away. My eyes slid to Caleb, who wasn't as cheerful as he was moments ago. Frankie wasn't deterred. His smile never faltered. He said something quick and low to the man. The scowl lifted to arches. The man palmed Frankie a business card.
10 o'clock tonight. Be there.
Frankie pocketed the card as the man disappeared into the crowd. What was that about? I don't know if it counts as anything except a very odd and disturbing encounter, I said.
I have his phone number,
Frankie said. Caleb shrugged.
I think that counts.
How do you know him? I asked. Wait, I don't want to know. It was too late.
He's a peekaboo boy.
A what?
Lenny asked.
He works down at the Peekaboo Club in one of their shows.
That guy?
Danny gasped.
He's their star. Just think of him in tiny jean shorts and suspenders.
I'd rather not.
Lenny said. I need to move. This city is too much for me, I muttered.
Oh yeah, I've seen him. He's not too bad.
Caleb said. We all turned to him with quizzical eyes.
Hey, when you wager on everything, you're bound to see everything. However, this one caught me by surprise.
Wagering. That's the meat of Caleb's life. However, I have to admit he's come in handy several times so far and has taken everything in stride. He's been willing to help no matter how ridiculous the situation. Would Grayson do the same? No, I can't say he would. He'd get whatever was needed done, but not by putting himself out there. Caleb fixed my floors. Grayson would pay someone. Caleb dressed up as a pirate to flirt with princesses. Grayson would have a meeting and show up at the last moment with his lawyer's card to deter Charming for suing for the turret damage. Caleb was helping Frankie carry out his challenge, albeit to get one step closer to his wager with me. Grayson would stop the challenge with his lawyer's business card. Is that accurate? I asked myself. Grayson is a businessman. Of course he would handle any situation as such. I'm being too hard on him. If he had stepped in, none of this would be happening, and I wouldn't know about the Peekaboo Boys. That would be a plus. Either way, something positive did come from tonight's experience. Caleb proved he's rather amazing. I think I've only seen him through the eyes of a poker player and haven't given him a fair chance. Tonight, I see him in a whole different light. I'll give him his wager whether Frankie wins or loses. 3 rounds later, we were haggard and ready to quit. Only Frankie and Charming didn't seem to notice as they glared pointedly at each other. I'd had enough. Even tourists were starting to distance themselves. We've seen that you both can be very charming and obtain phone numbers from even the most unlikely people. But we need to call it a draw before someone calls the cops, I said.
There was a cop here.
Frankie said. Yes, and you got his phone number. But you know what I mean.
One more person for each of us, and then we'll call it a draw.
Charming countered. I rolled my eyes as they resumed glaring. The energy waves rolling off of them were heavily charged. I've got a better idea, I said. Frankie, you charm Charming. If you can, then we'll know you're the better charmer. They both shot their laser stares at me.
Are you insane?
Frankie asked with flaring nostrils. Suave Frankie was gone. Real Frankie was back. Caleb saddled up next to me.
Are you trying to sabotage my efforts?
If anything, I'm helping, I said. Charming smirked.
I agree. There's no way Frankie can charm me. In fact, I'll add an extra week of service into the mix.
Frankie pulled me to the side.
Are you crazy? I can't charm him.
I think you can. In fact, I know you can.
How?
He demanded. Do you remember the photo he used in the billboard design?
Don't remind me.
He groaned. How do you think he got it? Frankie shrugged. It's from his personal collection, I explained. Danny dug up information on him today. He used to work with you at Celebrity MASH. Frankie's eyes widened. Whipping out his phone, he scrolled to the billboard design.
I should have known. Look, he cut himself out of the picture. The only part left is his shoe.
Do you remember him? Frankie nodded and slid a glance over to Charming, who was pacing nearby.
I would have never recognized him. We used to sing a duet together. His name is Mark Frank. We joked that if we ever took the show on the road, we'd be Frank and Frankie.
That's cute, I said.
Well, back then, life was different. I still don't see how this will help. He's changed. I've changed.
Frankie, you left to open a chapel. He followed your lead and opened a chapel and became your top rival. He's been acting a role all these years, just like you've been acting tonight. He might have lost himself along the way. I'm not saying he's mentally stable, but you can break through to Mark Frank.
I can't believe it.
Frankie shook his head.
I never recognized him. Had I known, we could have been great business allies.
You still can. Awaken Mark from Charming's spell. I think you're the only one who can. Don't think of this as a competition anymore. Think of it as helping a lost friend. Frankie gave a sober nod and placed his phone back into his pocket. He straightened his suit and crossed the distance, slinging his arm around Mark's shoulder. Before Mark could protest, Frankie said,
I always thought Frank and Frankie would have been sensational.
Mark's mouth dropped open. His face paled. Frankie laughed.
Don't worry, my friend. It's a nice night for a walk, isn't it?
Frankie asked, steering Mark down the sidewalk.
How did you know?
Caleb asked. Danny told me. It all started making sense.
Instead of wasting the entire evening, you could have picked Charming right away and ended this competition.
I smiled. Neither of them were ready to talk. Just like little kids, you have to wear them down first. Caleb chuckled and wrapped his arm around me, steering us in the opposite direction.
Now I'll never know if Frankie won or not.
He did. Caleb glanced down at me.
You're calling it?
Frankie won.
So that means I won.
I smiled. He won, hands down. I was sleeping blissfully in my own bed without Muffin or Frankie's competition looming over me. That was until the phone woke me up at an unnatural hour. I glanced at the clock. Oh, 10 o'clock, still too early. I answered the phone with a yawn.
This is Mrs. Miller. I'm returning your phone call.